in the heart of a land lost to time, where the rivers glowed silver under the moonlight and trees whispered to one another in forgotten tongues. There was a village tucked between two great hills, hidden beneath the watching gaze of an ancient Oroko tree. The villagers called it Oroko, named after the sacred tree that marked both the beginning and end of many tales. Oroko was a quiet place. Children played under the shade of tamarind trees, women wove baskets in the ochre dusk, and old men told stories that bent the minds of the young. But just beyond the village, where the wild bush grew thick and the sun never quite touched the ground, stood a house that every villager had learned never to speak of aloud. It was known only as the Silent One's house. It was a broken shell of a building, walls sunken into themselves like a corpse's chest, windows empty and staring, as if watching the village with eyes long dead. No smoke had ever risen from its chimney, and no footstep had ever been heard from its veranda. But every now and then, late at night, someone would whisper of a flickering light behind its windows, or the sound of footsteps across dried leaves, or a voice, soft and slithering, calling someone's name from the dark. The elders never told the story of that house. Not in full. They only muttered warnings. If you pass it, do not stop. If it calls your name, do not answer. And if you hear drums from within, run. But as is the way of all places where warnings are passed without stories, curiosity begins to bloom. And so it was that two boys, blood brothers not by birth, but by bond, found themselves dreaming of the very house they had been taught to fear. One was named Tay, the other Jima. Tay was tall, sharp-eyed, and bold in that dangerous way children become when they've never tasted real fear. Jima was shorter, thoughtful, and quiet, but with a deep hunger in his heart for things unexplained, stories unfinished. They had grown up together, chasing fireflies in the rain, stealing mangoes from the chief's garden, and listening to tales told by Mama Ifin, the oldest woman in the village whose tongue was bent from secrets. It was from her cracked lips they first heard the phrase, "The house was not always empty, you know." Once, it beat like a heart, and that was all she said. From that day, the boys began to wonder. They asked the blacksmith, he spat and walked away. They asked the chief's guards, they laughed nervously. They asked Jima's mother. She slapped him hard and forbade him from playing with Tay. But Tay, emboldened by the silence of the grown-ups, leaned in one night and whispered, "We'll go, we'll see it, and we'll come back with a story no one can ever forget." Jima hesitated. He had heard the village dogs whimper in the direction of the house. He had seen birds fall silent when flying too close. But Tay's words burned with a fire too strong, and Jima, though frightened, followed. They made a plan. They would sneak out the night after the festival of fireflies, when the entire village would be drunk with singing and praise and fermented palm wine. They prepared quietly. Tay stole a gourd of river water, blessed 3 times by Mama Ifin. Jima pocketed a charm carved from bone and ash, said to ward off those who walk between breaths. They packed nothing else, for they intended to return by moonrise. But no one told them the house had been waiting, and that on the night of the festival of fireflies, its eyes would open again. The village glowed with life. Lanterns hung from every tree branch, strings of woven firegrass lit the paths, and the air was thick with pounding drums and the scent of roasted yam. No one noticed 2 boys slipping away into the shadows, wrapped in cloth darker than the sky, barefoot and breathless. They walked through tall grass, past the edge of the banana groves, through the abandoned yam fields, until even the music seemed to tremble and die behind them. And there it was, the Silent One's house. The moon lit its roof in cold silver. The trees around it leaned away, as though recoiling. No birds, no frogs, not even the chirp of crickets. Just silence. Tay grinned. Scared yet? Jima did not answer. His eyes were fixed on the doorway, a jagged mouth in the dark wall. The air was wrong, heavy like walking underwater. Still, Tay stepped forward. Jima followed. The porch creaked beneath them, not wood creaking, but something else. Something deeper, like a breath being drawn. They paused. Then Tay reached for the door. It was already open. The house was colder than night. The walls seemed to pulse slightly, as though remembering once being alive. Faded carvings snaked across the beams. Not letters, but symbols that shifted when looked at too long. Dust danced in the air, and yet, there were no cobwebs. They stepped carefully, feet sinking into a floor soft with time. And then a sound. Dripping. Drip. Drip. From the ceiling, drops of dark red liquid landed on the wooden floor. Tay looked up. Nothing. Just darkness. Then, from the corner of the room, a voice. "So you finally came." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was curious, like someone who had been waiting for visitors far too long. Jima froze. Tay turned toward the voice. "Who's there?" The shadows shifted. And then, a face. Not one but many. Faces in the wall. Eyeless, mouthless, watching. And then a drumbeat. Boom. From somewhere deep inside the house. Boom. Jima clutched his charm. It burned hot in his hand. Tay looked toward a hallway that had not been there moments ago. A whisper slid across the floorboards. "The house remembers. The house forgives. But only if you leave something behind." They should have run. They didn't. Instead, they stepped into the hallway, and the door behind them closed with a sound like the sky being torn. The hallway was narrow and long, lined with doors that should not have fit inside a house so small. The walls were slick, not with water, but with something that shimmered like oil and breathed like skin. The air was thick, every breath a struggle, as if the house resented the boy's presence, or hungered for it. Tay led, his shoulders stiff, jaw set, but even he had gone silent. The bravado he wore in the village had fallen away like an old cloth. Jima clutched the bone and ash charm tight against his chest. Pulsed like a second heartbeat. The drumbeat had faded, but its echo still pulsed in the bones of the house. Deep and slow like a warning yet to bloom. They passed the first door. It opened by itself. Inside was a room full of masks. Dozens, maybe hundreds, mounted on every inch of the walls. Carved from wood, bone, leather, clay. Some grinned, some wept, some screamed. None had eye holes. One mask, larger than the rest, turned on its own and faced the boys. Its mouth opened slightly. "We see you," it rasped. The door slammed shut. Jima gasped. "Tay, I want to leave." Tay looked at him, and for the first time, there was fear in his eyes. But the hallway had changed behind them. Where the entrance once was, now stood a blank wall, pulsing slightly, like a throat that had swallowed them whole. "We have to keep going," Tay whispered. "We need to find the way out." The second door creaked open. Inside was a room of mirrors, but none reflected the boys. Instead, the glass shimmered with images of other children. A girl with empty eyes, a boy with no face, a child floating upside down in dark water, all staring outward, as if watching the boys from behind the glass. Jima stepped back. The charm in his hand burned hotter. Tay reached toward one mirror, compelled by a force not his own. "Don't!" Jima snapped, grabbing his wrist. The mirrors cracked. Thin, spiderweb lines raced across every pane. He touched what was not his. Came the voice from nowhere. "Now the glass will remember him." They ran. Deeper into the hallway, past more doors that groaned and whispered. The house was not silent anymore. It breathed. It murmured. It laughed. Then they reached the last door. Carved into the wood were words in no known language. Yet the boys understood them. "This is the room of reckoning." Tay hesitated. "Maybe this is it, the heart, the story." Jima shook his head. "This is wrong. We need to leave something." That's what it said. Tay turned. "Then what do we give it?" Silence. And then the door opened. It was circular. Smooth. Walls made of dark stone that pulsed like wet muscle. In the center stood a table, and on it, 2 bowls carved from black wood. Beside them, a scroll. Old, dry, but unburned by time. Tay approached. The scroll unraveled itself. There were 2 names written on it, etched not in ink, but in something darker. Something red. Tay. Jimo. The scroll began to bleed. "The house must keep what it is given," said the voice. "One of you must stay." The floor shuddered. Jima stepped back. No, no. This is a trick. Tae looked down at the bowls. One stays, one leaves. Choose, the voice said, now everywhere. Or both remain. Then, a shadow rose from the wall, a creature stitched from darkness and ash. Its eyes were two black suns. It had no mouth, but the voice came from it. This is a house of memory, and memory always costs. Tae turned to Jima. I'll do it. Jima's eyes widened. What? I brought us here. I insisted. The shadow moved. He who offers must be sure. Tae lifted his bowl. The shadow howled, not in pain but in joy. And then the house changed. Jima woke up at the base of the Oroko tree. Dawn was breaking. Birds sang. The wind was soft again. He sat up, alone. Tae was gone. The charm in his hand had turned to ash. He stumbled back to the village, dazed, silent. When the elders found him, they said nothing. They only looked toward the hills, and then turned away. Jima never spoke of the house again. But every year, on the night of the Firefly Festival, a drumbeat sounds faintly from beyond the bush. And Jima, now an old man, tells only one story by the fire, not of the house, but of the choice made inside it, and the price of curiosity, and the weight of sacrifice. Years passed, but the memory never left him. Jima grew tall and strong, but behind his quiet eyes was a silence that not even age could soften. The village of Oroko changed. Children became farmers, storytellers became ancestors, and even the sacred Oroko tree dropped its limbs in mourning from time to time. But one thing did not change. Every year, on the night when fireflies lit the world and drums filled the sky, a single beat echoed from the wild bush. Boom! Soft, distant, and chilling. The villagers would pause, eyes turned toward the hills, and then pretend nothing happened. It was easier that way. Only Jima knew what the sound truly meant. Tae was still inside. And the house was still hungry. It began subtly. A child vanished while fetching water. A goat returned with milky white eyes. A hunter returned from the forest, unable to speak, his tongue blackened like coal. Jima noticed the signs. He had seen them before. And then came the dreams. He saw the hallway again, endless and alive. He saw the mirrors cracked, whispering. He saw the bowl on the table, now overflowing with dark liquid. And he saw Tae, standing in the middle of it all. Not aged, not broken, but unchanged. Unblinking, waiting. Then one night Jima dreamt of the floorboards. They were rising, one by one, and something beneath them stirred. Something bound in chains of memory and bone. He woke in a sweat, heart racing, breath short. The house was stirring again, and something old was trying to come out. Jima, now a man of 42 seasons, knew what he had to do. He gathered his walking stick, his gourd of blessed water, and a bundle of herbs wrapped by Mama Ifan herself, before she passed into the land of the ancestors. He carved a new charm, not from bone this time, but from the wood of the Oroko tree itself. Sacred, forbidden, powerful. He did not tell anyone he was leaving. At dusk, he vanished into the bush. The forest greeted him like a familiar enemy. Quiet, watchful, full of memories. He walked through the banana grove, now overgrown with weeds. He passed the yam fields where no one planted anymore. He reached the place where the house once stood, and found it was still there, but different. Now it breathed louder. The walls had grown taller, warped with veins that pulsed like arteries. Roots had sprouted from beneath it, clawing into the earth like desperate fingers. And above the door hung a mask. It was Tae's face, carved in wood, mouth open, eyes shut. Jima did not tremble. He walked forward and touched the door. It opened like a mouth remembering a name. Inside, the house had changed again. It was no longer silent. It wept. From the walls, the ceiling, the floor, soft sobs echoed, like children who had forgotten how to stop crying. The hallway was gone. In its place was a spiral staircase, descending into red light. Jima took the steps one by one, each one creaking not from age, but from memory. The deeper he went, the louder the weeping became. He passed doors that bled, doors that blinked, doors that whispered his name in voices that sounded like his mother, his uncle, his childhood friend. He ignored them all. At the bottom of the stairs was a chamber, circular, carved from rock. And in the center, a figure curled on the floor, chained at the wrists, the ankles, the neck. It was not Tay. It was the keeper, the oldest spirit of the house. The one who had first whispered the deal. It had no face, just a mouth too wide, full of teeth too small. "You have returned," it gurgled. "We are pleased." Jima stepped forward, charm in hand. "Release him." "No." The chains tightened around the creature as it spoke. He chose, and he was chosen. That which is given cannot be taken back. Unless, Jima leaned in, unless you take his place. Silence, then laughter, not from the keeper, from above. A sound like bells breaking. Tay was watching from the ceiling, hanging upside down, arms folded, smiling with sorrow. "You came back." Jima's throat tightened. "You knew I would. It's been 20 years. I almost forgot your face." The keeper stirred. "What say you, brother? Will you change the story?" Jima looked at the charm in his hand. The Oroko would glowed faintly. "No," he said. "Then why come?" The creature hissed. Jima raised the charm. "To end the story." He threw the charm into the center of the chamber. It burst into light. The floor cracked. The chains snapped. The walls screamed. The keeper shrieked, retreating into the cracks. The house began to crumble. Jima reached for Tay, who fell like a bird freed from a cage. They hit the floor together, but it was no longer stone. It was water. The chamber filled with it, not drowning them but cleansing. The house howled. The doors above shattered. And then nothing. Jima opened his eyes beneath the Oroko tree. Next to him, a boy no older than 15 with sharp eyes and a quiet smile. "Tay?" The boy looked confused. "Who's Tay?" He didn't remember. The house had released him, but it had also taken the years. Jima, now wrinkled and gray, smiled through tears. "You're home now. That's all that matters." He helped the boy to his feet. Together they walked back to Oroko. The boy who had once been Tay could not remember the house, nor the years he had given to it. To him, Jima was just a kind stranger with sad eyes. And Oroko was new. The villagers were stunned. Some whispered that Jima had called his brother from the land of the dead. Others believed he had made a deal with something older than the gods. But no one dared ask. Not aloud. Instead, they watched the boy from a distance. They watched how animals refused to meet his gaze, how mirrors refused to reflect him clearly, and how shadows seemed to cling to him longer than they should. And Jima? He said nothing. He raised the boy as his own, taught him to fish, to walk without sound, to read the wind. But every night, when the fire died down and silence returned, he would sit outside and look toward the hills, toward the place where the house had once stood, because he knew it wasn't gone. Jima went back once, alone, to where the house had been. There was no structure, no walls, no roof, but the earth was wrong. The ground was soft as if freshly dug. The grass refused to grow. The wind changed direction when it reached the clearing. He placed his palm to the soil. It breathed, and he heard a whisper in the roots. "We wait." He left that day and never returned. But the mark remained, like a healed wound that still ached when it rained. The boy, now a man, stood beside Jima. He still didn't remember the house, but sometimes in dreams he saw red halls and doors that bled. He would wake up gasping, certain someone was whispering his name. The fireflies danced above the village, and the drums called out into the night. Then it came again. Boom! Soft, distant, but unmistakable. The villagers froze. Children clutched their parents. Dogs whimpered. Jima stood still, eyes closed. "It begins again," he said. The boy, now called Ko, turned. "What does?" Jima didn't answer. He simply handed him something wrapped in cloth. Ko opened it. Inside was the carved Oroko charm, the last one ever made. That night, Jima took Ko outside the village walls, to the edge of the banana grove. There's a story I never finished telling, he said. He told him everything. About the house, the hallway, the room of reckoning, the keeper, the sacrifice. He told him who he truly was. And Ko, to his credit, did not run. He listened. He wept. And when the dawn broke, he asked only one question. Is it over? Jima smiled, but his eyes were full of storm. No, son. Curses don't die. They sleep. Jima faded like a sunset. Slow, gentle, remembered. Ko buried him beneath the Oroko tree, with a charm in one hand and river water in the other. The village moved on, but the house never truly let go. Every few decades, the drums beat again. Every few decades, another curious soul wanders toward the place with no name. And when they open that door, the house remembers, forgives, but only if something is left behind. In every village, in every land, there is a place you're told to stay away from. And sometimes you must listen, for curiosity is not always courage. And not every door should be opened, because some stories are waiting to finish themselves with you.